So we've got two C's in here. So first one is competent. Competent, and the other C is consideration. Now again, we want to try to get these down to just one word, or really as few words as we can, but it's still simple and understandable, and it's phrases it is that we know. So let's first start off with, let's say, consideration. And there's really two types of consideration that we have: valuable and good. Now, most consideration that's used in real estate contracts is going to be valuable consideration. Good consideration is also acceptable, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit harder to prove. So if we're going to break this down to just one word, first what is consideration? It's what's being given. Trying to think of how we could simplify that down even further. But we'll start with that. What's being given? So 3 words. Not great, but a lot simpler than just this random word of consideration. If we talk about how this is used in day-to-day conversation, if you're considering something, it means you're thinking about it. That's not necessarily what that means here on the exam. When this relates with contracts, it's what's being given, what's being exchanged. If you're just giving somebody something just because for no reason whatsoever, that means that contract lacks consideration. There's nothing being exchanged. There's nothing being given. So that doesn't create a valid contract. If you don't have something exchanged in the contract, there's not a valid contract. Now, what can we exchange? Well, what typically is exchanged if you're buying a property is money. Money, or really we could even exchange property for property. That's what money is basically. Money is a form of property. When we have money, that's some of our property. If someone stole our money, they're stealing our property. So money or property is our valuable consideration. It's really anything it is that we could put a dollar amount on. That's valuable consideration. So what is good consideration then? Good consideration, if we want to try to keep this down to just one word, just super simple, we could call this love. You want to expand on it more, maybe we call it friendship, a more diluted version of love. But that's basically what good consideration is. And maybe you're more of a cynical person and you can put a price on love, but let's say that you can't do that because that's what the law says. If it's something you can put a dollar amount on, that's valuable. That's our money and our property. Everything else, love, affection, friendship, because you're giving your child, your son or your daughter a property because you want to give it to him as a gift. You're doing that because you have love and affection for that person. That would be good consideration. And now good consideration, this is something that's a little bit more difficult to prove. And just to kind of take a sidebar from these terms here, if we're talking about in a contract or a deed, let's say, because both of those have to have consideration, they have to have something being exchanged, something being given. If we want to give this property because we love somebody, we have to put in detail why it is that we love them. What we have to describe that love, which kind of difficult to do, a lot easier to poke holes through than if we just said $5. $5, even though it's not a lot of money, is valuable consideration. And that's why a lot of times you might see a deed or a contract for something that says $5, valuable consideration, plus other consideration. $5 plus other consideration. Because if we do not have any consideration and we could prove that there's no consideration in the agreement, then there's no contract. Because in Florida, to have a valid contract, we've got to have these 5 items, one of them being consideration. So you definitely want to know that one. Again, there's the 2 types: valuable consideration, money or property, anything we could put a dollar amount on, and then good consideration, which is love, affection, friendship, things like that. Now for competency, competent parties is really kind of the full definition, but really we could just break this down to competent. And if we want to maybe put this in another word, sane. In most cases, this means 18 plus, although you can get into a contract with somebody as a minor, but that minor can void the contract, basically saying they're not competent because they're under the age of 18. So when you're dealing with somebody under the age of 18, that's where they get to make the choice of whether or not it is that they're competent. So on your exam, I don't think it's going to bring up the 18 point of this, but you do want to know that competency means that you're sane, you're of sound mind. Whatever makes sense to you, you could say sane, you could say sound mind. If sane makes sense to you, then just use the word sane. If that doesn't, maybe use the phrase sound mind. That's competency. That you were not taking crazy pills when you sign this contract, that you're of sane mind. And that's, kind of you see in like these criminal court cases where people try to plead insanity and whatnot. You could try to plead insanity if you're being sued over a contract. Say, I was insane at the time, and that's why I just signed the contract. I didn't even look over it, but I wasn't competent. If you could prove you weren't competent, that's a valid element of contract. Now, this is the theoretical side of the law. I want to make that disclaimer here. In the real world, this depends on who's got the better attorney, how hard it is that they're fighting for this, and a lot of other aspects that go into this. But on your exam, it's a lot simpler. You just need to know the basic principles, the theoretical stuff, that in order for a contract to be valid, there has to be competency. And why that's important in the real world for us as well, because, again, this is stuff we need to know every day because our business is contracts. Again, without contracts, we don't have business. So we really need to, if there's one thing it is that we're an expert in, it should be contracts because, again, without that contract, we're not having any business. So we've got to have a contract, and we've got to know the ins and outs of the contract, the things that could cause the contract to fall apart. If we have a contract that doesn't have any consideration, we might make an agreement with a buyer or a seller for a listing, or a buyer for a buyer brokerage agreement. But if we don't have anything being exchanged for that agreement can very easily be invalidated in court because it would be considered, again, to tie in another term with this here, a void contract. It's void if it's missing something, missing one of the elements. We'll say one of colic. So if it's missing one of these colic elements, that's called a void contract. The courts would basically say if you're trying to sue somebody over this contract, they would say this contract did not have any consideration, therefore it is void, therefore we will not enforce it. Void contracts, it's another term, unenforceable. If a contract is unenforceable, it's unable to be enforced in court. That's what unenforceable means. And again, a lot of these terms, sometimes context clues will help you out, especially when you pay attention to what it is and you kind of know what it applies to, what it pertains to. If you know the little bit that cannot go to court, this is unable to be enforced, unenforceable, unable to be enforced in court because it's a void contract, because it's missing one of these colic elements, it's missing one of these 5 elements that we need to have a valid real estate contract. For missing one of those elements, it's void, and it's unenforceable in court. We cannot enforce it in court because it's void, it's missing one of those elements there. And you can see how all these terms start to tie together and how we could have a much more complex question that's using a lot of these terms in different answers of the question or in the actual question itself. And the better it is that you know these terms, the more you're going to understand the question being asked and the terms it is that they're giving you. So let's talk about the O. This is offer and acceptance. Offer and acceptance. An offer is made, and then that offer gets accepted. So offer is made, and then the offer gets accepted. We don't have a contract until we have the acceptance portion of this. So it's called offer and acceptance. These are fairly straightforward. And let's see, what did we break this down? How are we going to simplify this if you're having trouble with offer and acceptance? So, no acceptance, no contract. So if this offer does not get accepted, it never turns into a contract. It stays an offer. Now, something that also ties into that, that's another phrase, another element of a contract, is that it's in writing and signed. And for this, I would tie in the statute of frauds, because that's what requires certain real estate contracts to be in writing and signed. So we have to have offer and acceptance. An offer gets made. That offer could be a verbal offer, a spoken offer, or it could be a written offer. But now, in order to turn that offer into a contract, we need to have acceptance of the offer. And in Florida, when you're purchasing property, that needs to be in writing and signed according to the statute of frauds. So the statute of frauds requires certain things to be in writing. One of those things, super important, probably the most important for your exam, is purchase and sale contracts. So to purchase a property, to buy a property, to sell your property, not only do you need to have it in writing, but it also needs to be signed by both the buyer and the seller. That offer maybe gets made by the buyer, and then the seller accepts it. Now, if you're making that offer in writing, if you're basically just filling out a contract as a buyer and just signing off on all of your sides, and now all you got to do is get that to the seller, and the seller's just got to sign on their sides, then you've got a legally enforceable contract. You'd have a valid contract. So if it has all 5 of these, that's what we would call valid. It's a valid contract if it has all 5 of these elements. And if it's missing one of those elements, we call that void. So valid and void are the two opposites of each other, and that specifically means we have everything, then it's valid, or we're missing something, it's void. And then unenforceable, we're unable to enforce it in court because it's void. If it's valid, it's enforceable, meaning able to be enforced. Able to be enforced. Enforce, able, able to be enforced. So a lot of times you break these terms down like that, and kind of, especially when it's kind of 2 words stuck together with that, enforce, able, switch it around, able to be enforced. You just have to remember the in court. And look, with these key terms, you don't want to overcomplicate your studying and your review and your memorization of these terms. Because the more it is that you add to these, there's a lot of terms that you need to know to really be able to understand the language of real estate. And you know, there's certain situations where you need to know the depth of certain topics, where you've got to know something super in depth, but start out with the surface level. Understand that this means that the enforceable, able to be enforced in court, keep it as simple as that. Contract is able to be enforced in court. Now, what that means more in depth, worry about that later. First, start out and get that simple little bit down. And that, a lot of times, is enough for you to understand what we're talking about in the question. That's why with everything up here, I'm not putting up big, long definitions. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. One word if we can, like this one here, love for good consideration. Super easy. That definition that we have there is shorter than the term. Good consideration, it's 2 words. Our definition for that, just 1 word. That's super easy to remember. Now, if you say it's love and affection or friendship, and I mean, you just added like 7 words to try to memorize for this one concept, and that one concept might not even show up on your exam. So you don't want to put too much effort into any one term. You want to really kind of just get it down at surface level first, and then for some of the more important stuff, then you start to go a little bit deeper into it. But when you have that surface level understanding, it helps make things a lot easier, especially when you see it in the context of the question. If you've got that basic definition down, that simple 1 word that you can easily remember, it's a lot easier to figure out what the question is asking of, even if you don't know enforceability of contracts inside and out. Now, last one we've got here. Before the last one, a little bit more on in writing and signed. So we talked about purchase and sale contracts have to be in writing. Another thing that has to be in writing, according to the statute of frauds, is deeds. Deeds always have to be in writing. We'll tie that in because I want to try to touch on deeds a little bit today as well. Another thing that has to be in writing is mortgage documents. Promissory notes, those have to be in writing as well. That's our mortgage contract, the note or promissory note. That has to be in writing and signed. And the one where there's a little bit of strings attached to this here, and this is how we get deeper into this stuff. So in writing and sign, the statute of frauds, there's actually a lot that you should know about this. Now, first and foremost, you want to make this connection right here. If you can't make this connection that the statute of frauds is in writing and signed, you don't want to go any deeper into this until you've got that basic connections. The statute of frauds requires certain contracts to be in writing and signed. You got that down? Okay, great. Now let's move on and talk about which contracts. The purchase and sale, the deeds, the mortgage notes, and then we have two more that apply in certain cases, and that's leases and listing agreements. Leases and listing agreements, these have to be in writing if they're more than 1 year. So if they're less than 1 year, this no longer is a requirement. So if we've got a contract for a 6-month lease, now we should have it in writing. You should always get everything in writing, but your exam does not care about recommendations or what you should do. It cares about what you legally have to do. And in order for a lease that's longer than 1 year to be valid, it has to be in writing and signed, according to the statute of frauds. But if it's 6 months, the statute of frauds doesn't apply. It does not have to be in writing and signed. So we could ignore this fifth element of in writing and signed here and just focus on the other four. We still need competent parties, offer and acceptance, the L, which is legal purpose. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then we need consideration as well. So we always need these four. In writing and signed, we need that sometimes. Not all the time, but certain things, certain documents. And again, to get into those details, once you've got this connection down of in writing and signed means statute of frauds, okay, what are those contracts? What are those documents we need to have? Purchase and sale contract, deeds, mortgage notes, and then leases and listing agreements. And notice how I saved those two for last because they're the most complicated. You want to start out with the simplest stuff first and then build on that into the more complex stuff. If you just try jumping in right away that leases and listing agreements are only required to be in writing if they're more than 1 year, now that's going to confuse you with purchase and sale contracts. Purchase and sale contracts always have to be in writing. Mortgage notes always have to be in writing. Deeds always have to be in writing. But with leases and listing agreements, they're only required to be in writing if they're more than 1 year. So again, notice how that's a little bit more complex. So this more complex stuff, the stuff that's the hardest to remember, the most complex, save that for the last. Get the easy stuff down first and then build upon that. Now, one more term we've got up here before we go ahead and take a break, legal purpose. So that's what this L is up here. So a legal purpose, that we're doing legal business. We've got a agreement for legal things. So buying a property is legal. Selling a property is legal. Now selling a property that you don't own, that's illegal. So that would violate our legal purpose here. And really, with this, if you're doing flashcards or however it is that you're studying this, I wouldn't even put any definition with this here. I would just underline legal. If you want to put a definition for it, legal. That's the word it is that you want to remember. If legal doesn't make sense to you, write down don't break the law, or it doesn't break the law. It's not against the law. Whatever phrase or word makes sense to you. And this one is a pretty simple one here if you understand what legal means. But you already know legal means against the law. So if you remember legal, or if you already know legal is against the law, there's no need to study that. There's no need to know that because you already know that basic concept. Now, there's a lot of laws that could be broken. There's a lot of Florida statutes. There's a lot of FREC rules you learn about in the course. So there's a lot of details regarding what's legal. But again, to keep this surface level, we just need something that's not against the law. So for example, let's say you're trying to sell a property, but it's not your property, it's your neighbor's property. You just don't like your neighbor, so you're trying to sell their property out from underneath them. I know it sounds ridiculous me saying that because you can't do that, and you know you can't do that. It's obvious that it's illegal to sell something you don't own. So if you signed a contract with somebody to sell your neighbor's property that your neighbor owns their property, and you're just like, I don't like my neighbor here. You pay me $100,000, you can have the property. What gives you the right? You have no legal right to sell their property, so that would not be for a legal purpose. You can make that deal with somebody. If somebody's dumb enough to give you, or misled or defrauded, we could even say, to a certain extent where they'll pay you $10,000 for a property it is that you don't own, you could make that deal. They could give you that money, but then when they don't get the property and you try to sue them in court for not kicking your neighbor out because you sold it to them, well, you were never the owner in the first place. It was never legal, so that would be void in court. And you could see how ridiculous this is here. The courts wouldn't even waste time debating that topic. They would just need some proof, some what we call prima facie evidence, prima facie evidence. So prima facie is proof, basically. Prima facie evidence, this is proof. So if you've got some sort of proof, if your neighbor could prove, your neighbor gets called in there because they're like, oh yeah, we're trying to sell the property. They prove that they're the owner of the property. Case closed. It's a void contract because it was illegal from the start. And notice how simple that is. Don't overcomplicate some of this stuff here. That's why I recommend just these 1 or 2 word definitions for this stuff here to remember this stuff. And this is where you can kind of start to, the wider scope it is that you understand about these different terms, now they kind of all relate to each other. You don't need to memorize everything in depth. You just need to remember, okay, it's legal. Then you make that question of, okay, is this legal? Is it legal for you to sell your neighbor's property? No, it's not. If you're the owner, then yeah, it's legal for you to sell it. But if you're not the owner, you have no legal right to sell the property, no legal purpose. It's a void contract, and it's unenforceable in court. So that's a bunch of terms about contracts here. I want to touch on some even more terms about contracts, of ways that we could describe contracts while we're on this topic. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick commercial break. So stick with us. I'm John Christmo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. If you've been thinking about real estate, look, in this current market, it's hard not to. There's so many opportunities that exist out there for residential real estate, commercial real estate, business brokerage, property management. I mean, it's ridiculous how much opportunity lies from having a real estate license. So look, if you've been thinking about getting a real estate license, I mean, it's minimal cost compared to starting other careers and starting other businesses to get into this. So I urge you to check it out and give it a try. I mean, even if you're just using your license for personal use, you've got huge, immense benefits there. Go to this link. It's licensefl.com. That's licensefl.com. Put that link in the description. It's got your step-by-step guide to get a Florida real estate license. And look, check it out. Give us a call. We're here to answer any questions it is that you have, and go out there and make some money.
Does your current career allow for unlimited income potential? With a career in real estate, the sky is the limit. What you put in is what you get out. Find out more about how you can tap into the unlimited income potential of a career in real estate at tampaschool.com. Did you know that statewide, only about 50% of test takers pass their state exam on the first try? At the Tampa School of Real Estate, we've broken down passing the class and state exams into 4 simple steps: learning the information, reinforcing the information, testing your knowledge, and being confident and prepared. View the details of the full strategy at passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com.
Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Christman. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. Every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, we come to you live to help you understand the technical side of the real estate industry. If you're just tuning in, you're probably looking at this board and saying, oh my God, what is going on here? Why is there so much on here? I must have missed so much. Hey, if you're in that boat, you could always rewind and replay at our Success Center. That's tampaschool.com/success. Again, tampaschool.com/success. We'll have the whole episode on the Success Center, tampaschool.com/success after the show. It's on the same page you're watching it right now if you're already on our Success Center. It'll be as soon as this is done being live. It's going to be right up there. It sometimes takes a minute or so for it to switch over to the playback version, but all this you can find on there. And really, yes, there's a lot we've got on the board here. And for the most part, what I've got here in black are the words, and then what's in blue are the simple definitions it is. So, I mean, everything we've got up here, we've got contracts, and we talked about this last week, and we'll just bring this up again. We want to start off even what's a contract. A contract is a promise. It's a promise or an agreement between two parties. Now, whether or not that contract is valid and enforceable in court, able to be enforced in court, is going to depend on if we have these 5 elements or only 4 elements if it's not recorded to be in writing and signed due to the statute of frauds. So, I mean, what we've got up here on this whole board, which seems like we've got a lot, we've got contracts, so we've got prima facie evidence, some evidence that proves what we're saying is true. Basically have something in writing, that means you have prima facie evidence. Competent parties, offer and acceptance, legal purpose, in writing and signed, consideration, valuable consideration, good consideration, void, unenforceable, valid, enforceable. We've got like 15 different terms up here. 15 different terms, and we've probably got no more than 30 words on this board. Maybe 35 words if we're going to count them all out. There's not a lot that's on here that covers 15 terms, and that's the point I'm trying to make here. You want to try to simplify this down to as little as possible. What's the least amount of information that at least points you in the right direction of what this word is talking about? Because that's where you got to start out. You got to start out with just that basic surface level understanding before you dive any deeper. You're not going to understand the one year requirement for leases and listing agreements about the statute of frauds until you just know that the statute of frauds means it has to be in writing and signed. That's the prerequisite before you get any deeper into this. But let's talk about some more contract terms here. And with these, once you've got these basic definitions down and you're still not sure what we're talking about here, like with the statute of frauds, the items that are required to be in writing, the purchase and sale contracts, the mortgages, the deeds, the leases and listing agreements when they're over 1 year. If you don't have that much down, then you go a little bit more in detail. But first and foremost, get that simple connection made. Now with contracts, let's talk about the different ways we could classify a contract. Because we talked about really everything so far that we need to have a legal contract, to make a contract able to be enforced in court, because that's the point of a contract. The point of a contract is to have an agreement that we can take to court. If the contract is unenforceable, then if let's say we've got a purchase and sale, a buyer and a seller, and they've agreed to transact to buy and sell this property, but let's say that the buyer decides, I don't want to buy it anymore, they can't just do that unless there's some out in the contract. Again, this gets a lot more complex, but at surface level, if we just have a basic agreement that says, I'm buying your house, then you've got to buy that house. If you decide not to buy the house, that's where we could have some damages associated with that, where somebody could sue somebody in court. So let's say you as the buyer want to sue the seller because the seller just said, I'm not going to sell my house to you anymore. If you've already got a contract and it's got those 5 elements of a contract, you've got competent parties, you've got offer and acceptance, you've got legal purpose, you've got it in writing and signed, and you've got consideration. If you've got those 5 things for a purchase and sale contract, you have a legally enforceable agreement. And there's not really many cases at all where the seller has the opportunity, unless you're adding some extra verbiage into your contracts. But there's not really much opportunity or outs or exits that a seller has in a standard purchase and sale contract. So once they sign off on that, they've promised, they've agreed in a legally binding enforceable document to sell the property. And let's say they don't sell the property. Let's say they decide, yeah, you know what, I don't want to sell it anymore. I don't want to sell it to you, or whatever the case is, where you had this contract, you had this agreement, it's got the 5 elements, but the seller just says, no, I'm not going to sell it. So we've got what the seller just did is called breach. And I think we covered these terms on last week's episode as well, but they're super important terms, but we won't spend too much time on these because I'm pretty sure we did cover most of these on last week's. I think it was towards the end, so I don't think we got too in depth with them. So breach means that you're breaking the contract. Breach of contract is you breaking the contract. The seller making the promise that they're going to sell the property and then breaking that promise. If we've got those 5 elements of the contract, competency, offer and acceptance, legal purpose, in writing and signed, and consideration, if we have those 5 things, they broke the contract. They broke the agreement, and now we're able to enforce that in court if it's a valid contract, meaning it has those 5 elements here. Now, notice how I'm using these words in a sentence, and that's how you could kind of evolve deeper into this. Once you understand the basic meanings of these terms, these simple 1 or 2, 3 word definitions, now you can start to work them into sentences and understand what's going on here and how you might see these terms in a question potentially. So the seller breached the contract, and now we have some remedies for breach. Now we just established that breach means breaking the contract, so remedies for breach mean that we have a fix for breaking the contract. Or maybe fix doesn't make sense to you. Maybe we call that instead solution. I like the word solution better, so we'll replace that. Solution for breaking the contract. Seller broke the contract. They don't just get to run off and just not do the deal. I mean, if the buyer just doesn't do anything, yeah, they basically have that. But the buyer has options. So the buyer has options. One of those options is, and now in the real world with this, it's not our job to be an attorney or to play an attorney or pretend to be an attorney and give legal advice. We're not here to give legal advice, but we do want to know what could happen. And if they want actual legal advice or they're going to want legal representation, then they hire an attorney for that. But so the analogy I like to use for us as real estate professionals, as realtors, as real estate agents, whatever we want to call ourselves, we're the executives of the transaction. And the executives in a company, a good executive isn't actually in the trenches doing the day-to-day stuff, because when they are, they're not focused on the larger picture. The CEO, the executive, the person in charge, their job is to focus on this larger, broader picture of everything. That's what your job is as a realtor. You're the CEO of the transaction. You want to look at the broader picture of things. You know, if this contract gets kicked over into legal, gets kicked over to an attorney, a basic understanding of what that attorney does. Now, it's the attorney's job to know the legal side of this, the law aspect of this in detail. It's our job here to see, okay, this deal's going this way here. Let me talk to the client and touch on them with some of the details that they should know about if this goes, if maybe we're the agent for the seller, we're the realtor for the seller, we're the real estate professional for the seller, and the seller's saying, well, what if I just don't want to sell it to them? What are they going to make me do? Well, their options are these remedies for breach, the solutions that the buyer has at hand should they hire an attorney and seek these here. Number 1 is specific performance. And this is the one I would say is probably going to cut the deepest, because specific performance says that you can't just decide that you don't want to do the deal anymore once you've signed the contract. You're in this deal, and we're going to take you to court, and we're going to sue you to specifically perform the contract. In the contract, you said you're going to sell the property, so we could take you to court and sue for specific performance of the contract. So breaking this down, performance, do the deal, if we want to just kind of make that. Because one of the ways we have to terminate a contract, if, let's say we have this agreement for buying and selling, the buyer buys, the seller sells, and no problems, that's called performance. When the deal goes through as planned, that's performance. So performance means to do the deal. And that's the best way to terminate a contract, is just to perform the contract. Buyer buys, seller sells, everyone's happy, we get paid, we do the deal. That's what performance means. Now, specific performance, if we need to be specific about this, it means basically we're going to court. We're going to court and we're suing to do exactly. Sue to exactly to do the deal. So we're suing, specific and sue. That's kind of what we're tying together. We're suing to do the deal. We're seeking that they do the deal as it specifically states in the contract. seller said in the contract they're going to sell the property for this price. They don't want to do it? Okay, fine. We'll see you in court and we'll sue you to do the contract for the price that you specified and signed off on in the contract. Now, if we try to do that, but we never had the contract in writing and signed, is it a valid contract? Not for a purchase and sale contract. That's why we got to go back. And again, that's why I started with those elements of a contract, because you got to know that surface level stuff. Otherwise, this deeper, detailed stuff doesn't make as much sense. So if this is a void contract, we don't have any options. If we weren't knowledgeable enough or advised enough to get this deal in writing and signed, there's nothing you could do when that seller decides they don't want to sell. Because the seller could simply say it's not in writing, and even if it is in writing, if they didn't sign it, no contract to enforce in court. It has to be in writing and signed for purchase and sale contracts. There's a few exceptions, some funny exceptions out there that exist, but I don't think you're going to need to know those for your exam. I would say, hey, keep it simple. It's got to be in writing and signed. There are some funny exceptions, though, in the real world where we could possibly have a purchase and sale contract not have to be in writing. Very limited circumstances that have to occur, but I wouldn't even say worrying about knowing that detailed, at least for your exam at least. So specific performance, and again, this is stuff we want to know in the real world. So if we have that seller, if we're the realtor for the seller, now it's ultimately bad for us if they don't do the deal, because we don't get paid until they do the deal. We don't get our commission until that deal closes. And this is why it's also important for us to understand what could happen if basically understand the severity of this contract it is that they're entering into. So the contract it is that they're entering into, once the seller signs off on that, and same thing with the buyer, does have to have both of them in writing and signed on there. Once they sign off on that, if they don't have any contingencies or clauses, paragraphs in the contract that give them some instructions on how they could get out of the deal. With buyers, we have this all the time, things like financing. We put a clause, and clause just means a paragraph. That's all clause specifically means, is just a paragraph. So if we put a clause or a paragraph in our contract, and this is already in standard contracts, you just fill in the blanks with this here, that says that this deal is contingent upon the buyer getting approved for this type of financing, this type of loan, this type of interest, this much money down. And if we put that all specifically in the contract and they can't get that financing, if they can't meet the criteria that's specified in the contract, then the contract gets terminated for impossibility of performance, because it's impossible to perform because the buyer can't get that financing. So there's a lot of ways we could put little exit strategies like that in there, especially for a buyer. Another one that's common with buyers is inspection periods. You put in there, you've got 15 days to inspect the property. The buyer's got a 15-day window now to terminate the deal. Now, once they go beyond that time period specified in that paragraph, that's where this becomes an option. Specific performance, or another option we have. This is the method that's most commonly used in the real world. And again, it's our job to know that these things could happen. So we're advising our client, and they say, well, I mean, are we able to get out of this contract after we sign it? We don't want to say yes, because the answer, if they're a seller, is pretty much always no. Once they sign off on that contract, that property is getting sold. Unless the buyer can't get the financing that's specified, or they void it with the inspection, or one of these things goes through in there, we've got a legally enforceable contract. And they could sue to make you sell the property if you just don't want to sell it to them anymore. So let me ask you this. Are you sure you want to sell the property? I am. Okay, well, let's sign. We have this discussion up front, and that way they don't even think about that being an option down the road, because they know already the repercussions that come in. And that's how these terms are not only important for the exam, where you want to know them for your exam questions, but they apply every day when we deal with contracts. The other method we have, and this is one of the more common methods here, I'm going to switch over to blue here so you guys are able to read this. We've got what's called liquidated damages. Now, liquidated damages, if we want to just keep this nice and simple, we could just call this the deposit. So let's say the buyer says, I'm just not going to buy it. I qualify for the financing, I missed my inspection window, but you know what, I've just decided I don't want to buy it. They're past whatever time period you put in there for the inspection that's allowed for an inspection. So let's say you put 15 days for the inspection, it's day 16. Or the other thing too, maybe with financing, let's say you put in there with financing and they're able to be approved for the financing. They've already qualified for the financing. So the only way they could get out of this contract is to break the contract. But they're really not getting out of the contract. They're just breaking it. And when you break it, when you breach the contract, there's solutions available to the other party. And what's commonly used in the real world is the deposit money, the escrow, the earnest money deposit. That money is put up in advance, and if the buyer forfeits that money, that becomes liquidated damages for the seller. It's liquidating that money that's put up in advance. It's liquidating the deposit money. And if we want to make more sense out of this, maybe we say keep deposit. When the seller keeps the deposit, they're collecting liquidated damages. And that's another solution we have for breaking the contract. Another solution we have on top of that are compensatory damages. So compensatory damages is compensation. And again, we just want to really kind of emphasize that root of the word here, compensation. Compensatory is compensation. Compensation is money given or money lost in this case here. And we'll also put up here actual loss. So the actual financial loss. Both of these ones are dollar amounts. This is our deposit. Compensatory damages is the actual money lost. So let's say we'll go back to the seller breaching or breaking the contract. The seller decides they just don't want to sell anymore. Now the buyer, they do have the option for specific performance to force the seller to sell. That's one option they have. Another option they have is to, let's say they paid for an inspection. They paid $500 to have an inspection done. Let's say they paid $1,000 in cost and inspections or whatever it may be. So the buyer spent $1,000 out of their pocket to get inspections done, appraisals or whatever it may be. And now the seller doesn't want to sell. And the buyer's like, okay, all right, but I want my $1,000. I spent $1,000 because we had a legal agreement that you're going to sell me the property. I'll be honest with you, I don't really want to buy the property anymore, so I'm not going to force you to sell it to me, even though that's an option with specific performance, but I am going to come after you for that $1,000. I want that $1,000 reimbursed to me. That's where we're seeking compensatory damages, compensation damages. And again, it's not our job to be the ones hunting down that $1,000, trying to get that money back from the seller. That's if they want to hire an attorney, they could hire an attorney to sue for the compensation. And they might be saying, oh, well, the attorneys are expensive. Well, tack on legal cost as well. That's also compensation. You breach the contract as the seller, so now the buyer's coming after you not only for the money they spent inspecting the property and doing all the stuff they wanted to do because they thought that you were going to do the deal with them, but then on top of that, now they're having to spend money in legal fees. So they probably have to spend money up front, but they're able to get that money reimbursed if they win in court as compensation damages, compensation for the money that was lost, the actual damages, the actual loss. So that's compensation damages. And maybe that scenario I gave you guys earlier of you trying to be sneaky and just sell your neighbor's property even though you don't own it. Let's say you were doing that. You're selling this random property who you're not legally the owner of. You're trying to defraud people basically. So you do that, and this person ends up spending money. They spend $1,000 to inspect the property that you don't own, that you have no right to sell. Well, then they find out, okay, you can't sell it. Well, you made a deal to sell it to me. I spent money because you signed an agreement with me. Now let's try to get compensatory damages. Whether or not you'd be able to do that, whether or not you'd win, that's a question for an attorney, not a question for us. But that's an option. That's a possibility. That's a road they could go down. And that's our job here, to understand these different paths, these different roads it is that things can end up playing out with. So that's compensatory damages. The last one we've got up here, and then we're going to take another quick commercial break, is rescission. Stick that up there because we're running out of room down here. And rescission means to cancel. To cancel the deal. So let's say it's a little bit more complicated of a scenario. You want to know first and foremost, rescission just means to cancel. We're suing to have the deal canceled, to invalidate it. And let's say that there's something that happened and somebody's defrauding somebody. Let's say the buyer's looking to buy a property. They get into a contract with the seller, and now the seller's maybe suing for specific performance. The buyer might do a counter lawsuit for rescission to cancel the deal. If they can maybe prove that the contract was never valid in the first place, maybe they're suing for rescission because they weren't competent at the time. Maybe they could somehow prove that they weren't competent when they signed the contract. Well, they would hire an attorney and sue to cancel the deal. Yeah, it's going to cost them money. Yeah, they've got to go through an attorney. It's not something we could do as the real estate professional, but that's an option. And again, we want to know this. Especially for your exam, you want to know these options that are available. If we're trying to cancel the deal, if we're trying to invalidate the contract, to cancel the contract, that's going to be when we're seeking rescission. We're trying to sue for rescission. So those are our 4 different remedies for breach. We've got rescission, meaning to cancel, specific performance, suing to do the deal, forcing them to do the deal, forcing them to perform their part of the deal, liquidated damages, keeping the deposit, and compensatory damages, seeking the actual money lost, trying to sue for the actual money lost. Those are what could happen if they decide they just want to not do the deal. If they sign the contract and it's got the elements of a legal contract, this is where it becomes. And look, we never want a contract to get into this territory, because if these things are going on, really the only one where we still have a chance of probably getting paid is specific performance. So if they do end up getting the transaction to actually go through because they sue for them to do the deal, then eventually we'll probably get paid. But look, any one of these here, it's our job to prevent this from happening. We want to know that these are possibilities. These are the things that could happen if somebody breaches the contract, but we want to try to avoid breach altogether, and we help avoid that by explaining to them, hey, these are the things that could happen if you decide just to break the deal, to just break the contract. Can't really do that. The law says there's solutions, there's remedies for this that exist out there. We're going to take another quick commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about terms. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the estates, because I know a lot of you guys struggle with estates, the freehold, leasehold, all those types of estates and whatnot. So we're going to talk about that next. Stick with us. I'm John Christopher. You're watching Ask the Instructor. Hey, so if you're thinking about starting a real estate career, it could feel a little overwhelming sometimes. Look, that's completely understandable. That's why we're here to help. If you haven't already, check out our Success Center, tampaschool.com/success, or if you don't even know where to begin, give us a call. We'd love to help you out. We've got advisors standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way it is that we can. Our phone number is 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. Give us a call. We're the Tampa School of Real Estate.
Do you want a career that allows you to be in control? With a career in real estate, you'll get to call the shots. Whether you're looking at starting part-time or want to become the next top agent, a career in real estate makes it possible. Find out what it takes at tampaschool.com. Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Are you thinking about a career in real estate? Hey, I'm John Christopher with the Tampa School of Real Estate, and we've helped thousands of people just like you obtain their real estate license. If you're thinking about a career in real estate, give us a call. The phone number is 813-928-0106. Our advisors are standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way they can. Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Christopher. The show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. We're live here in our studio in sunny Tampa, Florida, talking about the technical side of real estate, trying to help you understand these terms that not only are important for your exam, but also that you see in the real world. This is a follow-up. We did this the first time we ever did an episode like this where we're just kind of talking about these terms. was last Wednesday. And we got such great feedback on it. We're like, okay, let's do this again. Let's get deeper into some of these terms. Let's talk about some more stuff. And that's what we're here doing today. But every Wednesday, it's always something different. We're always talking about different topics, how to study for your exam. We've got stuff on open houses. We've got another show we do on Fridays, State of Real Estate. All this stuff can be found at tampaschool.com/success. If you've never been on there, write down that link, tampaschool.com/success, the little slash thing there. That is our Success Center. So much information, so much content on there to help you build a successful real estate career because we want to see you successful. That's ultimately our goal. First, you got to be successful passing the exam, but then you got to be successful making some money. So that's our goal, to see you guys successful, not just to help you pass the exam, but to get you started off with a new career, a new business, a new life even. But let's get back into the terms here, get back into the topics of today's episode. So I want to switch gears and talk about the estate stuff because a lot of times people will overcomplicate estates. And this is a topic that you definitely want to know. These terms you definitely want to know for your exam. So let's talk about the two main categories of estates. First one we have, we've got a marker that works, are freehold estates. So freehold, the word freehold means ownership. And the word estate, it's a little bit harder to define. We'll come back to that one because I want to talk about some of these types of estates and it'll just start to kind of connect together. It'll connect some of these dots. Estates, it's a little bit more vague and a little bit more difficult to combine. So we've got freehold, which is a type of ownership. The other type is what's called non-freehold. And I believe on the syllabus there's no hyphen there, but just to kind of make this a little bit simpler, we'll throw the hyphen in there just so we can break these two words up. Non-freehold. And non-freehold, this is also known as leasehold estates. On your exam, you could potentially see non-freehold or leasehold. Both of those terms are on the FREC syllabus, but they mean the exact same thing. And if you see the word leasehold, it's very simple what it means because you just got to take out that root word of lease. Because non-freehold estates are estates of possession. Meaning that you don't own the property, but you have legal rights to possess the property. And that's probably what I would give you guys for a definition of estate. It's the types of right it is that you have with the property. What types of rights? Do you have ownership rights with your property? If it's a freehold estate, you'll have ownership rights. Or do you just have possession rights to your property? And that's what you're going to have if it's a leasehold, aka non-freehold estate. So we've got freehold is ownership, non-freehold is not ownership. It's just possession. It's just leasing the property. When you lease a property, you have rights to possess the property. So, I mean, really, let's actually call it that for estate. The rights that you have associated with the property. So a freehold estate means you have ownership rights to the property. And there's two types of ownership estates, of freehold estates. Now, first, you want to understand this is the category of ownership estates. We call it freehold if it's ownership. So if you're owning the property, you have a freehold estate. Now, what type of freehold estate? It's probably fee simple. And if we want to just put one word with this, it's comprehensive. And if you know that fee simple is a type of freehold or ownership estate, you don't need to put anything else with it because fee simple is comprehensive ownership. It's a type of freehold. Freeholds are ownership rights. It's comprehensive ownership rights. It basically means it's the most indefinite, the most full type of ownership you could have is fee simple. Maybe we call it that. Maybe that makes more sense. Maybe comprehensive doesn't make sense. Maybe we use the word full. Again, if that makes more sense to you, there you go. And that's the extent of it is that you want to know. If you basically have full ownership and you own it until you decide to sell it or somebody has the legal right to take it from you, maybe because you didn't pay your mortgage or your property taxes or something like that, then that's fee simple ownership. The other type of freehold estate that's covered in the course that you need to know for your exam is called a life estate. Now, life estates you don't come across really a lot in the real world because most of the time people just use wills to decide who gets the property when somebody dies. But a life estate basically is not full ownership. This is ownership while you're alive. So we could say this is based on lifetime. Or maybe just that one word. Get that first. Life estate means it's on the lifetime. That you own it for your lifetime, but when your lifetime ends, somebody else is going to own it. So that's the life estate. And then here for the non-freehold estates, we talked a little bit about these last week. We talked about probably the most common one called the estate for years. And that has a start and end date. So this is the typical type of lease. When you sign a 1-year lease, any type of lease, any sort of non-freehold estate is always going to have a start date. So key thing it is that you want to remember for this isn't the start date, it's the end date. We can simplify that down. And just like I did there, if you're studying, if you're maybe writing flashcards, or you're writing notes or anything like that, it's okay to cross something out that you determine, okay, I don't need to know that. Just draw a little strike through it or erase it or whatever. Say, hey, look, to make this simpler, it's just the end date. You get the things as simple as possible, it's a lot easier to remember. Estate for years means you have an end date. It's a lease estate. It's a lease with an end date. That's estate for years. The other type is tenancy at will. And tenancy at will, these are either week to week or month to month. So week to week, basically every 7 days, you pay rent and you just keep living there until you give notice, which is a 7-day notice required to terminate week to week. If you're doing month to month, every month you're just paying rent and you're just there as long as the landlord continues to allow to be there and as long as you decide to stay there. And when you want to cancel that, you or the landlord, you've got 15 days to notify the landlord or the landlord to notify you that you're not going to be there anymore. That's a tenancy at will. Much different than a 1-year lease where you're still paying monthly, but you've already agreed to a 1-year term. That's estate for years where it's tenancy at will. That's where it's just kind of going on indefinitely. This could go on forever as long as no one ever gives each other notice to cancel or to terminate the lease. The last type we have is a tenancy at sufferance. And the tenancy at sufferance means that you're there beyond the end date. I won't put that up here on the board because it'll be covered up by a little bar at the bottom. It means that we're there beyond the end date. So our end date comes for the estate for years. We're still there without the landlord's permission. That's a tenancy at sufferance. You can remember the landlord has to suffer with you still being there even though the lease is up. If it's tenancy at will, they give you notice. It's 7 days notice required for week to week. So if they give you notice and after 7 days you're still there, tenancy at sufferance. If it's month to month, it's 15 days notice required, so they give you 15 days notice. After 15 days, you're still there. That's a tenancy at sufferance. So that's where you're kind of in limbo. That's what a tenancy at sufferance is. You're still there, but you're not supposed to be there anymore. You stayed beyond the end date, and now the landlord has to suffer with that. They have to implement legal means to basically get you out of their property. So that's suffering to them. They don't want to do that. They just want to give you notice and you leave the property in nice, good shape, and that's it. And they move on to whatever they're doing with it, whether it's selling it or having another tenant come in or who knows what. So that's our types of estates, to keep that really simple. And now notice there's not a lot up here. There's not a lot of details up here, and you want to start out just with the basics of this. You're better off having a basic understanding of a lot of topics rather than just knowing a couple topics really in depth. And the reason why that is there's a lot of concepts they'll ask you on with the course, and especially with these terms, a lot of times it's more so just kind of understanding what that word means. And if you've got a basic understanding of what that word means, you could probably figure out what the answer to that question is. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today for talking about these terms. Look, if you're studying for your exams, if you're trying to review topics for your exams, we've got a great weekend prep class. The weekend prep class, it's 2 days, an intense review of the most important topics for your exam. So if you're looking for more studying and you want a structured studying session, come join us. We've got a weekend review this weekend. If you're watching the replay of this and you're not watching this live now, check our schedule because we have these weekend review classes all the time. You can find that at weekendprepclass.com. Again, that link is weekendprepclass.com. So weekendprepclass.com, it's got the schedule. We still have a couple seats available for this weekend. This class is going to sell out. Our weekend prep classes always end up selling out, especially at our new Tampa location. There's only so many people we could fit in the classroom, so if you do want to get into that class, go in there and sign up now. It's a great program. It will really cover all the details it is that for the most important topics. It doesn't cover everything in the weekend review because you don't need to know everything. It's certain things that you want to know, and it focuses on those important topics in that weekend prep class. So if you want more review, come check out the weekend prep class. Look, if you're not in the Tampa Bay area, come get a hotel. There's a Holiday Inn across the street. Get a hotel. We've had people come from all over the state of Florida, from Georgia even. We've had people from other states, from California, from Illinois that are getting a Florida license that are just here to take that weekend prep class. It's that good. We have people travel that far for it. So if you're there, if you're already kind of struggling with this, come take this weekend prep class. Let us help you out. Let us get you the topics it is that you need to know. You might need to study more than just the weekend prep class, and that's why we have other tools as well. We've got an MP3 audio review for you to review the topics again and again and again, to just listen to that, put yourself on autopilot while you're studying, get those key concepts down. And we also have a question simulator you can use as well. Depending on how confident and prepared it is that you are, is going to depend on what study materials it is that you need. We've got our Pass First Try strategy. If you want to go through the whole process, check that out. It's passfirsttry.com. That's got our step-by-step strategy, our recommendation to help you pass your exams on the first try. And those three items, the weekend prep class, the question simulator, and the MP3 audio review, are our key components of that Pass First Try strategy. So check that out. And look, if you need help figuring out what it is that you need, what you need help with, how it is that you should study, where it is that you're at, give us a call. We've got advisors standing by who help students do this every day. We help people get licensed nonstop. This year alone, we've helped over 1,000 people get their real estate license. So give us a call. The phone number is 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. You can also text us at that number. That's about all the time it is that we have for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you Friday for State of Real Estate.
If you've been thinking about real estate, look, in this current market, it's hard not to. There's so many opportunities that exist out there for residential real estate, commercial real estate, business brokerage, property management. I mean, it's ridiculous how much opportunity lies from having a real estate license. So look, if you've been thinking about getting a real estate license, I mean, it's minimal cost compared to starting other careers and starting other businesses to get into this. So I urge you to check it out and give it a try. I mean, even if you're just using your license for personal use, you've got huge, immense benefits there. Go to this link. It's licensefl.com. That's licensefl.com. Put that link in the description. It's got your step-by-step guide to get a Florida real estate license. And look, check it out. Give us a call. We're here to answer any questions it is that you have, and go out there and make some money.
Does your current career allow for unlimited income potential? With a career in real estate, the sky is the limit. What you put in is what you get out. Find out more about how you can tap into the unlimited income potential of a career in real estate at tampaschool.com. Did you know that statewide only about 50% of test takers pass their state exam on the first try? At the Tampa School of Real Estate, we've broken down passing the class and state exams into 4 simple steps: learning the information, reinforcing the information, testing your knowledge, and being confident and prepared. View the details of the full strategy at passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com.
Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching.